engineering program, which is affiliated with MSDC and also the global recognition. We also have a banking program for the students who are pursuing their graduation. So along with the graduation, you can also get this program and you can become a job eligible in the banking sector. So ऐसा भी हो सकता है कि before getting your final degree in your hand, you can get the placement. So guys, if you are interested, also looking forward for your higher studies or certification program with us, so here we are, Forever Shamli Center for Management. So you are always welcome. We have a mentor for this program. You can take the information with them and you can start your career with a good mentorship with us. So thank you so much. With this, I would like to thank you so much. So with this, I would like to invite Javed sir to put more light on this program. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you. So, शुरुआत करूँगा पहले तो सबका शुक्रिया है और तालियां बाद में तालियां नहीं चाहिए। शुक्रिया कहूँगा कि आप सब स्टूडेंट्स का, सारे जितने 16 टीम के 180 190 स्टूडेंट्स आए जिन्होंने ये खेला, क्योंकि कई साल पहले, लाइक आई एम फ्रॉम द टाइम ऑफ द डायनासोर, बहुत पुराना हूँ मैं, उस वक्त स्टेडियम की टिकट मिलना बहुत मुश्किल थी। क्रिकेट मैचेस होते थे, कुछ ग्रेट प्लेयर्स होते थे, जैसे हमारे वक्त के सचिन तेंदुलकर थे, आपको अब उससे समझ जाएगा कितने पुराने हैं आप। तो स्टेडियम का टिकट मिलना बहुत मुश्किल था। तो कोई भी बड़ा मैच होता था तो बहुत अंदर से वो आता था कि जाए देखे। इंटरनेट का दौर नहीं था, फ्लिपकार्ट तो था ही नहीं। अगर 2 जोड़ी मोजे खरीदना है तो दुकान पे ही जाना पड़ता था, कोई और चॉइस था नहीं। टिकट लेना है तो विंडो पे जाना पड़ता था, कोई और चॉइस था नहीं। आज इतने साल बाद एक टूर्नामेंट रख के इतने सारे टैलेंट को एक साथ जमा करके डे इन डे आउट देख के जो खुशी मिली है, ऐसा लगता है कि वो दौर वापस आ गया। सो आप सबका बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया फॉर अ वंडरफुल गेम ऑफ क्रिकेट दैट यू प्लेड फ्रॉम मंडे टिल फ्राइडे। सो थैंक यू वेरी मच एवरीवन फॉर दैट। फिर जैसे कि सुनीता जी ने कहा कि पहले तो मैं सबका शुक्रिया अदा करूँगा मोहित का। ही स्टूड विथ मी फ्रॉम डे वन। टीम्स को इकट्ठा करना, आप लोगों के पीछे पड़ना, आईडी दिखाओ, आईडी दे, टीम बनाओ, पेपर लिखो, ये करो, वो सारा चार्ज। देन दत्ता हु स्टूड बाय मी ऑल द टाइम, हर अरेंजमेंट सारी चीज़ों के लिए। पराग और होल आईडी थिंग, हमारी यूट्यूब की टीम जो आई, to all the umpires, the commentators जो वहाँ पे थे, to even the office staff जिन्होंने इंश्योर किया कि इस धूप में, इस कड़ी धूप में आपके पास सबसे ज़रूरी चीज़ पानी है। ये बहुत महत्व है ना पानी का। सब जगह कहते सेव वाटर, यू सेव द प्लैनेट, और सब प्यास महसूस करते थे, देखते थे जल्दी आ। तो फिर उसके बाद बड़ा अच्छा लगता था। ये सारी चीज़ें तो वो टाइम पे सोचते थे कि स्टेडियम जाए और आप लोगों के लिए, आप लोगों की वजह से देखने मिली। तो जैसे कि इन्होंने कहा मैनेजमेंट, आउटसाइड द फील्ड आई वाज अ कैप्टन, ये रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी मुझे दी थी और मेरे पास एक टीम थी। अब उनको मुझे मैनेज करना था, मुझे उनको उनके रोल्स देने थे, उनके पोजीशन देने थे। अब किसको थर्ड मैन पे भेजूँ, किसको स्क्वायर लेग पे रखूँ, किसको गली पे रखूँ, किसको पॉइंट पे रखूँ, किसको वाइस कैप्टन बनाऊँ, पहला ओवर किसको भेजूँ, फाइनल ओवर किसको भेजूँ, कौन मेरा ओपनिंग बैट्समैन रहेगा। ये सब बहुत बट अगेन जैसा आप लोगों ने खुद देखा है, आप लोगों ने इतने दिनों में देखा है कि when you have a good team, when you have people to rely on, even whether you win, whether you lose, it does not matter because you know आप उसको you can change your fate. जो आज लॉस है वो कल विन हो सकता है, जो आज विन है वो कल लॉस हो सकता है। So मैनेजमेंट का यही कनेक्शन है। We are in the year 2023. This is the Ignite Cup 2023, 2023। आज से तकरीबन 30 साल पहले 83 के दशक ऐसी टीम गई थी, लेड बाय एडमिनिस्ट्रेटर अमृत माथुर, सीनियर सेलेक्टर जतिन परांजपे, मैनेजर PR मान सिंह एंड कैप्टन कपिल देव। और उस वक्त वर्ल्ड कप जीता। which was an impossible task. Impossible task था. और फिर यहाँ आके सबको सिखाया कि आप सिर्फ क्रिकेटर नहीं हो, यू आर एम्बेसडर्स, एंडोर्सर्स, ब्रांड मैनेजर्स, मार्केटियर्स, आप बहुत कुछ हो. और आज 20 साल बाद टुडे वी स्टैंड एट द कस्प वेयर द इंडियन क्रिकेट टीम इज रैंक नंबर 1 इन द आईसीसी रैंकिंग, टेस्ट, T20 as well as one day. So big round of applause for those. क्यों? क्योंकि आप लोगों का भी हम्बल बिगिनिंग है. पहले जब होश संभाला, खेलना शुरू किया तो दोस्तों के लिए खेला. आप पीठ पे मार मार के फेंक, ये तेरा नंबर है, तेरा नंबर करके आपने टीम से सिलेक्शन लिया. फिर उसके बाद बिल्डिंग के लिए खेलना शुरू किया, फिर एरिया के लिए, अपने स्कूल्स और अपने कॉलेजेस के लिए खेलना शुरू किया. कभी बैटिंग के लिए लड़ाई, कभी बॉलिंग के लिए लड़ाई. बॉल मेरा तो मैं करूँगा, बैट मेरा तो मैं करूँगा. तो आज भी चलता है. लेकिन यहाँ से आगे क्या? आई एम डेफिनेट मोस्ट ऑफ यू वांट टू प्ले फर्स्ट क्लास क्लब. आज इस जर्सी के पीछे आपके कॉलेजेस का नाम है, कल क्लब का, परसों फर्स्ट क्लास. एक दिन आप भी होप करेंगे कि हिंदुस्तान का नाम लिखा हो, इंडिया. राइट? ड्रीम तो वही होना चाहिए. इसी के लिए सेल्फ मैनेजमेंट भी बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है. टेकिंग द राइट स्टेप्स इज ऑल्सो वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट. अ ड्रॉप कैच कुड बी अ लॉस्ट क्लाइंट. A misfield could be a missed opportunity. If you have backed your fielders well, इसका मतलब ये है कि प्रेजेंटेशन में टेंशन मत ले, हम लोग भी है. ये सारी छोटी छोटी चीज़ें बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है. Commiserations to the team that could not make it in the final. Commiserations to the team that has come second in the final, but does not mean that you will not win. You will win. Everyone has their win and losses. My congratulations to all the finalists. The way they have played. पर यहाँ से एक ज़रूरी चीज़ बोलूँगा कि ये जो जर्सी है आपकी या आपकी है, यू डिजर्व है. इसके साथ थोड़ा ह्यूमिलिटी रखिए, थोड़ा प्राइड रखिए, और सबसे ज़रूरी है थोड़ा रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी रखिए. एक चीज़ के लिए मैं आप सबकी दाद देता हूँ. आई विल थैंक यू ऑल फॉर दैट लेसन दैट आई लर्नड अगेन. इस ये दोस्ती क्या होती है. आई कुड सी दैट अमॉन्ग्स्ट ऑल ऑफ यू. Not just the two teams here, but all the 16 teams that played, the camaraderie. यही हम कहीं बोलते ना यूनिफॉर्म में भूल जाते हैं, लेकिन जर्सी में याद रखते हैं. So thank you all. बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया आप सबका आने का, for playing, for making us a very proud audience, for making me a very proud viewer, for entertaining us in the last 5 days of scintillating cricket. हम चाहेंगे आप दोबारा आए, दोबारा खेलें, एंड ऑफ कोर्स हम चाहेंगे कि आप और बेटर और बड़े हो. बट डू रिमेंबर यू हैव टू सेल्फ मैनेज एंड यू हैव टू मैनेज योर ओन करियर एज वेल. थैंक यू वेरी मच. थैंक यू वेरी मच.
I would also like to invite Dr. Shraddha ma'am to take some guidance after this.
Okay. Stay. Just listen to the makeup. I was audible, huh? Without mic also. Right? When you play, just listen to the makeup. What's special about it? What is special about it? आप सुन रहे हैं उसको? You were not listening. Confidence और आप सब सुन रहे थे. You were listening to him as if he had started something. आप लोगों के ऊपर कुछ लागू कर दिया हो. बताओ क्यों? Yes. Good. Good speaker. Right. क्या हुआ? Sunita ma'am said you need management skills to play a game. But you need also communication skills. Right? You were listening to him because his communication skills are very good. Whichever the language, Hindi, English, but he was making you understand. Right? Right from couple days, Dhoni, Virat Kohli, do you think that their communication skills are good? Good enough, but they have worked on their communication skills. Initial years की couple days की speech सुनना कभी Kohli की speech सुनना, but they have worked on their market property. One thing, उन्होंने नहीं communication नहीं की होगा. तो और communication skills क्या होता है? कोई भी भाषा, हिंदी हो, इंग्लिश हो, मराठी हो, गुजराती हो, इतने अच्छे से सीखो ताकि आप बात कर पाओ. Suppose you will be the captain of your team. बात ही नहीं करनी आएगी तो टीम से नहीं आपकी बात. They will not listen to you. हाँ? So, you know, you have to be so persuasive when you speak. You have to be so expressive that you impress people. You have to impress कर पाओ और convince कर पाओ. That is कोई भी language. Right? So, play. Life is all about play. Just play. Compete करो, धक्का मत मारो. Compete करो, धक्का मत मारो. Fine? Yes. So, big round of applause. Congratulations to all the teams who participated. Thank you so much.
So now let's move to the most awaited moment for the evening. So here we would like to award the prizes for all the winners. So we will start with the first prize, that's the best batsman. Any guesses, guys? Who told Paras? It's absolutely right. So the best batsman of this tournament goes to Mr. Paras from AP Warrior. I would like to invite Vinay ma'am.
ये पारस की तरह दिखते नहीं है, लेकिन पारस की तरह ही खेलते हैं. तो आप सबसे ये शेयर करना चाहूँगा कि जैसे मैंने कहा कि राइट हैंड है बहुत अच्छी नहीं खेले. हमारे 2 एग्जीबिशन मैच में एक 50 और एक 40 मारा था. टोटल 50 और 25 बॉल.
So the next award goes to the best bowler. Any guesses, guys? Now, the man of skills. तो पहले भी सब फिक्स है, मतलब बोलने की जरूरत नहीं है. So you are right, guys. It goes to Aman Khan.
Hello. So जैसा कि मैंने पहले कहा शुक्रिया. Thank you very much for everyone. Thank you very much Vicky, Sunita. Thank you very much Dr. Chandra Sharma. Thank you very much Linda. Thank you very much to the RJ College and their team. Thank you very much to Salsa and their team. Thank you very much to management, to the administration, to the entire audience, our umpires, commentators, the field curators, the event team and everyone who made this event possible. जैसे कहते हैं कि पिक्चर अभी बाकी है दोस्तों, तो वी विल मीट अगेन फॉर ईदर 2023 Ignite Edition 3 or 2024 Ignite Edition 3. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Helps beat sensitivity fast. Sensodyne Rapid Relief.
Hello. We're live, right? You're on the internet watching us live, or maybe you're not, and you're here just checking us out. But my name is Brett. This is my channel. You've probably been here before. We do this live every Thursday for years and years now, and I'm glad you're back. So today is a special episode because we get to talk all about Docker the entire time, and a lot of this stuff I'm learning with you because there is a ton to talk about. Got my friend Michael on the show. We'll get to him in a minute. But real quick, just the typical promo. If you don't know, this is also a podcast. So check out below all the links. I have courses, which is how this all got started because people had questions. So we started doing this live thing for students of my courses. But you can get those coupons below. Not the Black Friday sale price, but very close to that sale price. It's still very cheap to get my courses. The podcast comes out every other week, which is an audio-only, edited-down version of this show. So if you miss some of these episodes, check it out in the podcast. I personally do chores around the house while listening to podcasts. That's my thing because I don't commute to work anymore. So I need that time. But you can check out the podcast there. All the other things. This show, by the way, is sponsored by you patrons. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to those of you sponsoring this show. So you can check that out as well as get essentially my newsletter. That's really what this is over at Patreon. The link again below. And you don't have to give me any money. The newsletter is totally free. Click the little follow button right there. You'll get basically email announcements. You can also install the app. But that all comes free. If you'd like to basically buy me a coffee every month, I'm very appreciative for that. But you get some exclusive benefits, including special channels inside our Discord server, which you can get for free right there. But the patrons get separate, an additional set of servers or channels. And one of those is our monthly hangout. And it's coming up here in the next couple of weeks, actually. But we call it the High Fivers group. And it's a lot of fun. Maybe 10 of us. It's not a ton of people. But we just are all people working in DevOps, working around in the community. And we just talk about projects we're working on, problems we're having. We look for advice. We ask others in there for advice on what we're doing. And that's a really fun group. I highly recommend it. I obviously don't miss it because I'm running it, but I would still be there even if I wasn't running it because it's a lot of fun. And I've made friends there. And we actually saw each other at KubeCon, which was great. We got a little group photo at the Kubernetes and Cloud Native Conference in Detroit. And hopefully I'll see some of you in Europe. I'm hoping to go to Amsterdam for KubeCon, Cloud Native Con. That'll be fun. So let me know in chat or in the Discord server. Again, 12,000 DevOps fans over there. Go check that out. Let us know if you're going to be at another conference. Often there's so many people in there now. There will be someone from that community at your conference, and you can hang out and talk about containers and DevOps. So enough with all that. By the way, this is the Discord server. You can go over to Discord if you don't know about that. Sign up. It's free. It's better than Slack. It's the cool place to hang out. And then we have the loot box, which we launched this year, which is all the swag. I am not wearing one of my own shirts today. I am wearing a shirt from Slim AI, which was on the show this year, making Docker images slimmer. But I have a bunch of cool stuff over there. Friends of mine work with me on the designs, and some of it's retro, some of it's new, like the Foxy stuff you recognize from courses. But yeah, go check out the merch shop over there. About once a month, we have a coupon, including right now, 15% off and free shipping if you want to get a t-shirt or a coffee mug or a hoodie or something. All right, let's get to it. Welcome to the show, Michael Irwin.
Thanks for having me, Brett.
So you've seen Michael around here before. Have you not had applause when you get on a show before? Is that new?
Oh, that may be new. Yeah.
All right. So we're both in Virginia. We are hours apart, although we have to usually go halfway around the world to see each other to a conference.
Yep,
Michael is he was first a Docker captain like me years and years ago, and then got hired by Docker recently, and is now moving into DevRel manager. What's your job responsibilities now?
Yeah. So when I started at Docker, I was an engineering manager and have kind of at the tail end of that transition now. So my official title is going to be senior manager for our DevRel team and heading up our DevRel team. So I'm pretty excited about it.
Yeah. So if you're someone who's interested in, by the way, starting a Docker community, or if you're such a fan of Docker and you talk about it everywhere and you blog about it and you make videos and you just do all the things, you could be considered for the captain's program, and you can go to this guy for that. Yep. All that information, by the way, is on their website about the community stuff. But that's how we met each other, and we've been friends ever since. So I'm glad you're back. I was actually looking back. It's been a few years since you've been on the show.
It's been that long. Wow.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many people at Docker now. is hard to keep up. Y'all are
It's true.
hiring like
It is.
crazy. And this year, like once we all, there's this phenomenon. There needs to be a rule about this, like some like Occam's razor or something like that. We need something like that for this phenomena, which is, as engineers, once we learn a tool and we found the way that we want it to work for us, we tend to sort of slack off keeping up to date with all the new version stuff. We don't, everything in our lives. I've got 1,000 tools on my machine that are all getting updates all the time. Every day, Brew has a dozen updates on my Mac. There's no way to keep up. And so one of the challenges I think we all have is that we learn a tool, and within a couple of years, that tool might have completely added a ton of new functionality and useful features for you, but you're not relearning the tool because we're all on to the next thing. And that's, I think, one of the challenges with Docker, right?
Yeah, and I'll add to that too, especially with Docker's history the last couple of years when it sold off the enterprise parts, and in many ways, just keeping, in many ways, Docker went into keeping the lights on survival mode for a period of time. And now that the company is growing again, and it's actually, we've tripled in size in the last year and a half, and we've had 5 acquisitions. I mean, so there's been a lot going on. And so now the innovation wheel is spinning again.
Yeah.
And so for many people, they didn't see a lot coming out of Docker, and all of a sudden now there's a lot coming out of Docker, and it's hard to keep up with it. So yeah, it's definitely kind of interesting position to be in at this point.
Yeah. In fact, I have this little image. Let's see if I can get this on screen. I'm
boy.
stealing this from a DockerCon talk earlier this year, or maybe it was in All Hands. Let's see. Yeah, this little thing right here. This is like at a glance for just this year. It's funny how it says Docker Confidential at the bottom, but it's actually on YouTube. But Docker loves to brag about the number of downloads because like Docker images are just a staple in the industry still on the Docker Hub, and it's usually in the billions of downloads or whatever pulls. And we're going to talk about some of this stuff. The Docker desktop extensions. I don't seem to have a cursor on this, so I can't really point at things. But it says here, 52 Docker desktop extensions. That's probably more now than it was in August. We have a lot of these OS-specific improvements. I'm going to just get some of this stuff out of the way because I do have these images. I'm just going to throw them up here. But this was another one talking about all of the sort of like what the extensions and the SDK for extensions are. By the way, for those of you who did not see that show, we had a show all on extensions in the summer. So back on this channel, and that's going to happen a lot for those of you watching, Mike's colleagues at Docker have been on this show multiple times this year. I mean, Docker's in the name of the show, so we got to talk about Docker at some point. But we had separate shows on this, so if you look back in this YouTube channel, just search for Docker extensions. I think it's my pick for 2022, like the feature of 2022 for Docker. However, we also have this list. Oh, wait, that's not it. This list.
There we go.
And this list is only partially complete. So we don't plan on a 3-hour live stream today. So I'm going to do a little work after this to extend this list to put some of the things that I still didn't get on this list. We're actually going to talk a little bit about the future maybe at the end there. But Michael, let's just get. I feel like we just need to jump in fast and go quick because I respect people's time and we've only got about an hour. So for those of you out there, by the way, ask questions. That's why we're doing this live. So ask questions. We'll try to answer them as it's happening. But we're going to rapid fire, maybe a few demos, but we're going to rapid fire down the list. And if you want us to dive into something or dig a little deeper, throw it in the chat. By the way, I can share this link. You can all add comments. Please be nice. And
what could possibly go wrong with opening up a document for the entire world?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. All right. So let's get into it. So, oh, wait, I don't have this up.
Which I have to say, since you got your Patreon page there, I'm a Patreon as well for you and supporting you as well. So definitely support Brett, everybody. I'll give another shout out to him as well.
Thank you. I appreciate that. By the way, these are in no particular order. I thought about making it reverse chronological so we could start from the latest stuff. This is one of the latest things, so we'll just talk about this first. If you've taken my course, you've heard me talk about artifacts. And if you've been in software long enough, especially as a developer, you know about things, JFrog, all these other artifact stores. We've had them for a while. Artifacts is like this nebulous term for things downstream. At least that's my point of view on it. And we all think of Docker Hub as the place to store our Docker images, but there's all these other things. Michael, what is this really doing for us? OCI artifacts. Why does that even matter?
Yeah, good question. So, I mean, yeah, as you said, Docker Hub in many ways has been seen as the place to store container images. But as the ecosystem has grown, there's been other types of things that we want to store. So, for example, Helm charts or WASM modules, or there's lots of different types of things. OPA policies. Even years ago, and I think actually on one of my appearances on your show, we were talking about Docker app. And it was kind of this idea of, hey, let's package up a compose file and ship it as an image. But in many ways, it wasn't the typical container image. It couldn't run by itself and whatnot. So it was kind of a way to hack images to share content. And so what OCI artifacts basically allow us to do is to recognize that there are different types of things that we want to push, that we want to share, that aren't just the normal container images like Helm charts, OPA policies, et cetera. And it's part of that specification. So it allows the ability to share, distribute, pull, push, et cetera, to be fairly generic and to support lots of different types of things. And so we're pretty excited to have that support in Docker Hub. Some of the other registries have had support for a while. Of course, Docker Hub, with it being kind of the first registry, it took a while to get a lot of the internal pieces ready for it and working on it. But we're pretty excited about it. And it's going to unlock a lot of neat capabilities to be able to build and share other types of things still using Docker Hub.
Yeah, and in fact, on this blog article,
क्या खिला रहे हो? रुको, मैं सेरिग्रो बना देती हूँ।
क्या फर्क पड़ता है? पेट भर के तो खाए ना।
फर्क क्यों नहीं पड़ता? खेल के आएगा तो उसके चेहरे पे दिख जाएगा, या इतनी एनर्जी होगी कि फिर खेलने निकल जाएगा। मेहनत करता नजर आएगा या अपनी क्रिएटिविटी का कमाल दिखाएगा। और ये फर्क तब नजर आएगा जब हम पोषण देने और पेट भरने में फर्क समझेंगे। बच्चों की मुट्ठी जितने पेट को भरना तो आसान है, पर पोषण भरना बहुत मुश्किल। सेरिग्रो, जिसके हर बोल में है फर्क। आयरन, इम्यूनो न्यूट्रिएंट्स और एसेंशियल न्यूट्रिएंट्स के घने पोषण का। नेस्ले सेरिग्रो, पूरा पोषण, पूरी तसल्ली की शुरुआत। नेस्ले, गुड फूड, गुड लाइफ।
I believe one of the examples is Helm. Mm-hmm. And if you're not aware, if you're not, Helm is not for everyone, by the way, but it is Kubernetes specific, and it is a templating and an engine to create really complex apps in a YAML file, or well, it's always going to be many YAML files, but we don't have to keep those in registries. I'm sorry, in Git repos, but we can also put I don't know who helped the industry come up with the OCI artifact store standard, but that extended the registry standard so that we can all support these other things. And then Helm had to add back in OCI registry support. But then the next problem is not every registry supported it, because this is a relatively new idea. Some registries, I'm not going to name any names, but Red Hats, that doesn't always work the way you expect. And of course, Hub didn't do it at all. So it's great that we're now merging. I wouldn't say that everything is fixed and everything is wonderful, because I imagine we got to wait for the other registries. I also use GitHub Container Registry, and it had its own issues with this over the years. I have not tested it, in the last 6 months, but there's always these weird little quirks with just simply storing a Helm chart, which is not a required workflow, by the way, people. You don't have to do this, but one common way is to store your essentially your templates for Kubernetes inside of the registry as an artifact, just like you do your images, and version them just like you do your images. And I know and have worked with many teams that have done that. Not everyone does that. You don't have to do that, especially if you're doing GitOps. You sometimes point at repos with something like Argo or Flux. But this is really cool, and I'm excited to see the other types of artifacts we all come up with. I have been voting for compose files for the longest time. Volume support, I think that was actually mentioned in this article, although we don't really I don't believe we technically have a standard for it, but at least it does work. We'll talk about extensions in a little bit, but we'll get into that.
Yeah. So again, it's kind of this idea of being able to push and share different types of content. So yeah, Helm charts, if I were setting up a Helm repo, for example, I would have to actually run a web server to serve those charts and everything, but now I can leverage all the same distribution channels I'm already using for the container images and other things. So pretty exciting stuff here.
Yeah. All right. That's one.
Boom.
We've got
Done.
30 more to do. No big deal.
Let's do it.
All right. So that's a big deal, though it may not impact you directly today. We're going to go down. I'm just going from the top of the list down. The next one is WASM, which we just got off a call. You were actually hosting a call where Docker was talking with the captains about WASM or WebAssembly. We should probably use the full word. This community may not even be aware of really what WebAssembly is. What's your 30-second elevator pitch on WebAssembly? Why does the industry even care?
Yeah, so typically a lot of folks have heard of WebAssembly in the use case of bringing native code into the browser. But over the last year or two, there's been more interest to take the ability to take these binary formats and run them in other locations, because WebAssembly runs in a pretty secure sandbox environment, and those modules are portable. And so how can we leverage a lot of the learnings and whatnot that come from WebAssembly and now run them in other locations, other use cases? So it's still a pretty early technology, early capability, and I'm not suggesting everybody just go and rewrite all their applications and start running them in WebAssembly. But what we're wanting to do at Docker is to be part of the conversation. And again, just like we were talking about with the OCR artifact support, how can we leverage a lot of the tools and the things that developers are already using for this new technology? We think the containers and WebAssembly modules are complementary. They work together. They are different technologies, of course. WebAssembly is fast and portable and lightweight and everything, and we can spend another show talking about it as well. And I think you've got one coming up soon too. So, but yeah, so we're pretty excited to be able to support WebAssembly and running it directly in Docker.
Yeah. By the way, I'm replying to some people in chat. So if you're asking questions, I'm putting some answers in there. Yeah, I mean, to me, is like let me ask this real quick, because I'm saving my learning for the actual episode I'm going to have with Nigel Poulton. We're going to have by the way, there's a future episode. We're going to have Nigel talking about Docker and WASM, and I'm basically going to act like the noob student, because I am a new student. I've not used WebAssembly before this, because it's mostly been a front end thing, and I'm not really a front end developer. I'm still a pretend developer on all levels. So on the front end, I've never had performance problems, because the apps I make personally are not that fast, aren't that complicated. Sure. So I understand, like, we the lower that we compile all of our apps down to, closer and closer to assembly and all the way into the bytecode, that's just going to reap performance benefits all the time. However, us as humans haven't always liked to write those low-level codes, and so we've always made up new higher level languages. We continue to make up new higher level languages. However, sometimes that comes at a performance cost, right? Yep. And so I had a conversation earlier with someone that was like, I'm still not even sure why I would need WebAssembly on the back end. And that's, I think, what the industry, like you're saying, the industry is still trying to figure this out, right? What are the good use cases for WASM? It's, I think you and I don't know if you were at the Kelsey Hightower thing with Scott at KubeCon, but there was basically this little hangout with the CEO of Docker and Kelsey Hightower from Google, and they were sort of talking about WebAssembly and containers, and Kelsey had a really good mindset, like he always does, a really healthy, non-fanatic, non-buzzworthy sort of thought process, where he was saying, that we've all established this workflow of containers being the deployment object. It's the artifact. We have all of our CI and CD pipelines are all revolving around containers now. It's assumed in cloud native that you're using containers in most cases, and we don't need to throw all that away just because we're compiling down to a different file type. And obviously there's a little more to WASM than that, because you need an executor and all that. But he was really breaking it down to saying, like, if the developer chooses to make a WASM app, why should the entire ops and DevOps chain and the build chain, why should all those things completely change? They probably shouldn't. And so the idea that Docker can provide us a way, at least today, to package it up in an image and then in the future run it hopefully in Kubernetes and other places, just like another container, that sounds perfect to me. Like, that's exactly what I would want as a DevOps person. Yep. So
and that's pretty much exactly what we announced with the technical preview, and maybe I can do a quick little demo of that as well too, and just show off. And again, we'll save a lot of the juicy bits for your future show. Let's go ahead and pull up my demo here. So I've got a compose file here, And maybe I'll zoom in once here. There we go. That's a good size there. I've got a compose file here in which I've got an Nginx normal container. I'll come back to this the server one here, and then I've got a database container here, and this is just running MariaDB. So my database and client here are just normal containers. This server is actually a WebAssembly application here, in which what I'm doing is I'm building a container image here, and I'll look at the Docker file. Again, we won't go into juicy details here, but this particular application is using Rust, and so it's setting up all the Rust packages and dependencies, et cetera. It's going to compile, do some optimization of it. But in this multi-stage build, the final stage here is doing a from scratch, and we're basically copying out the compiled WASM application, and that's all that's in the final image here. And in fact, actually, let's see if this works. Oh, okay, I don't have it built with a name right now, but the final container image is only about 3 megabytes in size. That's the size of this entire WASM application that has an HTTP server, and this particular app is connecting to MySQL and everything. So with the HTTP server, the source code, the MySQL connector and everything, to have an entire application about 3 megabytes, that's hard to beat. And so what's happening in this compose file is, all right, we're going to build that. We're specifying this WASM platform, which one of the cool things, again, about WebAssembly is I don't have to now compile for ARM64 and AMD64 and all the different architectures I might be leveraging, because the WebAssembly format itself is portable. And when I run this, I specify a runtime, and what that's going to do is it changes a little bit how the application runs. And we've got this on the technical preview docs and the blog and everything. But basically what's going to happen is, instead of running this as a normal container, that WASM module is extracted out and then dropped onto a WASM runtime. And that's how it runs. And so the cool thing here is that just with just a little bit of extra config, I can run full WASM applications here, and they network the same way as a normal container. I can still talk to my database, and my application can work. And as an example here, I can curl against that endpoint, and I could see a bunch of orders come back, and that Rust service, sorry, the Rust application that's been compiled to WebAssembly is talking to the database and giving us all the information there. So again, just like you're saying, the whole idea here is let's leverage all the tooling and the capability and the workflows and the processes that developers already know and love for now a slightly different technology, without the developers having to understand under the hood how it's all working. So yeah, we're pretty excited about it. Again, it's still early days in the technology, but we're excited to be able to help out in this space.
Yeah, and inside that image,
yep, is
it a single binary? Like if I actually inspected that image, what would be in it?
Yeah, so if this final image here, since I'm starting from scratch, for those that don't know, from scratch means literally I'm starting from scratch, from nothing. And if I were to look at this image, the only thing that's in this image is this compiled WASM binary. And that's the only thing that's there. So I'm going to be shipping this around. Eventually, this might become an OCI artifact
type. So like a different type.
Yeah, it's its own artifact type. Yep. But we started some of these demos before the full artifact support was in place. So, yeah.
I mean, so here's the thing for me. Here's like the sales pitch for me to teams that are even thinking about this or even curious. I'm talking from specifically from an ops and a DevOps standpoint, because I'm not usually advising the developers on how to architect the internals of their app or whether they should go WASM or not, right? I'm usually the person that's trying to optimize their build chain, their speed up their deployment times, reduce the size of their images, reduce the security of their images. So when I think of something like a Node.js app or a Ruby app, which are they're easy languages to write in. They have lots of functionality and lots of dependencies. Usually, you usually have a ton of dependencies. And if it would be possible for me to ship those as a single binary file, rather than, I have Ruby apps that I've seen that are 2 gig, full of dependencies and vulnerabilities, and just hundreds, if not thousands, of vulnerabilities in there. And if I can package all that down into a binary, not even include a shell, not include any system utilities that might be vulnerable. Granted, it doesn't mean that there's not vulnerabilities in my code, but it means that it's going to be a lot harder for someone to exploit that if it's all inside of a WASM binary than it is if it's just the open SSL version or whatever, whatever the latest hack is, the latest curl vulnerability. And I love that. I think that's one of the reasons I would advocate for Golang or Rust or something like these modern languages that assume, or not assume, but at least provide a very easy path to build you a single little tiny binary that you can distribute. I feels like what this does is this gives that ability to all the ecosystems that WebAssembly supports without each own ecosystem having to build their own specific build chain and tooling and process for all of that stuff. I don't know. Does that sound like a viable argument?
Yeah, I mean, and that's certainly one major aspect of it too. And I would say even the security model even goes beyond that, because, for example, in the browser, when a WebAssembly module runs, it only has access to the things that the browser gives it access to. So like it can't access the file system. It can't do a lot of different things. And there's a whole mechanism there called WASI. It's the WebAssembly Systems Interface. And again, at the end of the day, the module only has access to the things that it's been given access to. And so when you're running in these WASM runtimes, you can limit how much control or how much touch points to the underlying host and even the network and all these different things. So you can lock it down in ways that you actually can't even do with traditional Unix containers. So there's a really interesting security model that goes along there. Again, leveraging a lot of the lessons learned when it was originally built and developed for the browser environment. So
yeah,
there's still a lot of evolution that needs to occur, but yeah, it's pretty exciting stuff there. And I saw Marcus comment show up on the screen there of saying security wise it's more compelling than Unix containers. And again, I think it's that sandboxing environment and that WASI, that systems interface is makes it quite locked down there for sure.
Yeah, Marcos, another Docker captain, maker of Play with Docker. You've probably played with his tools over at Dagger now, which we're probably going to have Dagger on the show next year if I have anything to say about it. A CI conversation. We have to have a testing and deployment conversation with Marcos and the team. But yeah, I think that, I don't know what these rules look like. That would be maybe part of the WASM episode. How low level and complex is this? Because that's one of the struggles for developers is always, I would love to be able to fine-grain control the security of my app, but I don't understand all these tools, seccomp, kernel features, app armor, SE Linux. Like there's just, you name it all, you go down this list and there's just a staggering amount of complexity all of a sudden. And so most developers, they just don't do it. Right? They're gonna only do it when it becomes a functionality problem for their app. And like you said, even though containers run with less security privileges than a regular app on Linux, which is one of my arguments for containers in general, is that they automatically reduce the functionality capable for an individual app. But at the same time, it's still very much you have to opt out of things, right? There's still very much, you have to enable seccomp, you have to manually do that in Kubernetes, at least today you do. There's all this other stuff. So I love this idea of like a universal security boundary that we can all maybe wrap our hands around and comprehend. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah. And again, I don't want to get too far down, but there's some interesting like performance improvements that even come if I'm running multiple WASM modules in the same runtime, and if I need to communicate between them. Traditionally, when processes communicate with other processes, you're having to, either pipe things between it or, create files, and there's a lot of memory copies and everything that's going on. But when you're leveraging the same runtime and a lot of the sandboxing that goes along there, you can start to do things like shared memory, and there's just a lot of really cool things that provide a lot of really neat performance benefits. A lot of this is still being developed and still being evolved within the WebAssembly space. But I'll admit, when I went to the WASM day at KubeCon, because I'm still ramping up in this space as well, my mind was blown just at the number of things that are going on, and the performance improvements, the component models, all these different things. There's some really cool architectures that are coming our way. So pretty exciting stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so we're gonna remember you all, if you're interested in WebAssembly and Docker more, we're gonna have a future episode in December about that. At least that's the plan. So stay tuned. Jump on there. The Patreon is, you can get from there, or you can just go below and find the Patreon link, and you will get my email about who's going to be on the show and who's going to be on the podcast every week. So jump on that stuff if you want to know about the upcoming stuff. Or jump on the Discord server where I also list. They have an event system now in Discord, so you can list a calendar of things that are going on. And in our Discord server right now, it's actually saying we're live, and then you can see that it's pretty neat in there. Anyway, so I want to answer some questions real quick, but we're going to get to extensions. So stick around for extensions for a second. We're going to talk about those. It's not our first time on this show talking about extensions. It's probably the 100th time just this year. But I want to show off some new advancements, and we'll talk about some new extensions. But real quick, for those of you asking questions, I know you've been patient. Thank you. Yazwant, sorry if I mispronounced that, but you're asking about a live stream where I can work on a real project. I save a lot of that stuff for my courses. So if you are interested in that, you can get a very deep discount on any of my courses where I do a bunch of project work with you, showing you those in lectures. That stuff's below. If you're asking for me to do a live stream for free on YouTube about it, that is not in the plan, but I like the idea, and I'll think more about it and see if we can't come up with something for 2023, because we're already booked out on this show for the next couple of months. But let's see, what else? What happens after we create a Docker image? What are the different things that we can achieve other than creating pods out of it? Okay, so you really just containers. That's really the focus of images right now. You can use Docker export to technically turn it into files on your host file system, or put it into a tarball, and it's just a bunch of files, really, what's in an image. But I mean, that's the reason you use images, you build images, is to run containers, whether that's in a Kubernetes pod or a Docker Compose file, or however you want to run your containers. Every cloud now has dozens of ways to run containers. So you can run them in functions. If you want to do serverless, you can do functions in it with a Docker image. So lots of ways to do that.
Maybe I'll jump in there. So it's been interesting to see all the different use cases of running containers that are beyond just the traditional, I'm going to run this app in production or something like that. In fact, a couple years ago, I was working with a friend of mine who's an accounting professor, and he knows how to write a little bit of code. And he's like, I wrote this Python script that ingests an Excel document and then goes out to the Stock Exchange Commission and gets a lot of data, generates this report, and hooray, I can output some stuff. How do I share that with my colleagues who aren't nerdy, who don't know how to do everything? I'm like, I have an answer for you. And so we containerized it, and we made just a little Windows batch file because everybody's running Windows, and dropped the CLI command. And so he created this container image, and all of his colleagues installed Docker Desktop, and they would just double click this little batch file, and it would mount in the spreadsheet and kind of go from there. So he was using images to basically share here's a little application and the runtime that application needs, not with the intent of, hey, I'm going to run this in production, but it's just a little utility script that I'm going to share with my friends. And images and containers made that portable and allowed him to be able to share it with his friends. It was pretty awesome use case. And we're starting to see more and more of that kind of stuff where, hey, I want to share something with my friends that isn't going to be running in production in Kubernetes or ECS or whatever. So let us know if you have use cases like that. I'd love to hear them as well.
Yeah. There's a little bit of a related question. Jonathan's asking, do you plan to support other types of containers besides WASM? And I asked, what would we be thinking? And Jonathan replied, no simple binaries like Nomad does. So a system service, Mike can answer this, but that's not a container. So, Docker is containers. So it would, I don't know.
Well, and so I think one of the things that we're trying to also do with this WebAssembly thing is kind of be known more than just the container company, that we're a developer tooling company. And so, we can, because at the end of the day, the way you run Linux containers looks different than the way you run Windows containers. And so now these WebAssembly containers, they're all different run times, but it all provides the same interface, the same abstraction that developers are working with. So as of today, we're working and looking at WebAssembly, but down the road, who knows? There may be other types of things that we might look at. Nothing that I know about and can announce today, kind of thing. But
right.
But who knows? As the ecosystem continues to grow, if there's other types of runtimes, especially this container shim, that's really how we're doing this. As there's other runtimes that the ecosystem builds out, we might certainly look at how do we fold those in and make it easier for developers to use. So.
Yeah, that's a good point, by the way. And we should mention this because it's not a Docker specific thing, but Containerd has mini shims for extra functionality in Containerd. You may not be able to access it from the Docker command line. You might have to look into Containerd itself. But Docker, in essence, it uses Containerd underneath it. Kubernetes uses Containerd to run its containers by default nowadays. I mean, you can still use Dockerd, you can still use Cryo, but Containerd, I think, is becoming the standard, the sort of the default answer for Kubernetes. Yep. And it has things where you can run full VMs, you can run encrypted, you can have encrypted images, you can do all these things in Containerd now because it has that plugin model. There's actually a separate question we had here around. I'm confused from the past 2 years. Should I use Docker with Kubernetes after acquired by Mirantis? Most of the industry changing their containers to use Containerd. Can you please talk about it?
Ooh. Okay. So there's a couple different things that I think are mixed in there. So when Docker sold off the enterprise pieces to Mirantis, what that basically was is all of the operations pieces. So Docker, or earlier days of Docker was trying to do too many things, and it was hard to focus. And so, we were doing developer tooling, we were doing build systems, we were doing, here's a managed Kubernetes and Swarm service and registries, and there was just too much going on. And it ended up having us, we started competing against big names that we just couldn't compete with. Mm-hmm. And so decided, hey, let's go back to the roots. Let's go back to the developer tooling. And so they sold off those, we say the enterprise pieces, are really more the operations and registry and that kind of stuff, and refocus back on the developer tooling. So if you need an operations tooling and management system, Mirantis still sells their services, and it's a great product as well. And there's lots of other products out there as well too. As far as the swap to Containerd from Docker, that's actually been something that's been years in the making. And it was largely a marketing buzz and, oh my goodness, Docker shim's being removed from Kubernetes. Well, Docker actually started that when they spun out the container engine and made Containerd in the first place, because recognize, hey, not every system, every environment needs to be the ability to build images and to do everything that the Docker engine has. A lot of environments just need the ability to pull and run containers. That's it. And that's, at the end of the day, what Containerd is designed to do. Sure, it's got that plug-in mechanism and whatnot, but and so the swap for Kubernetes use Containerd is something that's been in the works for years, and it just now has rolled out. Because again, when you're running Kubernetes in a production environment, you want to minimize your security footprint and the things that might happen. So just run containers, use Containerd.
Yeah. If you're someone, I will add to that and say that if you're someone who maybe you're still using a traditional, I would say traditional because there's lots of other tools now to build images, but a traditional build situation where you want to build in Kubernetes and Containerd doesn't do that. Again, there's lots of other options, but a traditional way was to put Docker in there. We all started with Dockerd as our container runtime because we didn't have any other ones that, back when Kubernetes started. And even just looking at on the Kubernetes website, you can see on the list of runtimes, the Mirantis container runtime, which is, to me, it's functionally equivalent to the Dockerd, because the core of Docker daemon is the Moby project. That's open source. Mirantis builds that and relabels it as their own runtime, and they do support that shim. So if you're someone who you think there's features in Docker that I need in my Kubernetes for some reason, even though a lot of us are moving to Containerd, if you have a good reason for Dockerd, maybe there's some edge case scenario, or maybe you want to build with the same runtime that does other things. Maybe that's your setup. So you can still do that. You would technically, in the newer versions of Kubernetes, you would need to remove Dockerd, but then you would just add back in the Mirantis container runtime, which is functionally equivalent. It's the same core code. And you would have to hook that into Kubernetes, and there's basically a document here on how to do that. You would install that with the shim that now Mirantis is supporting. It used to be a community effort. Now Mirantis has volunteered to support that open source. So it's not that you can't run the Docker engine. It's now maintained by Mirantis. It's called something different, but it's the exact same stuff that you would use local Docker run with. And it does work. I've tested it. It's just most of us have evolved to other tools so that we don't need a very large runtime on our Kubernetes clusters, and we save that Docker runtime for local use, or for human use, I guess I would say. Anyway, yeah, so we had a lot of episodes on that. Actually, we've had multiple full long episodes. If you're still very curious about why all that happened, if you want the backstory from Justin Carmack himself, who's the CTO of Docker, he was on this show a couple years ago when that announcement came out. So go back and search this channel on YouTube, and you'll probably find those episodes. But that's a great question. All right, let's get to extensions. I'm excited about this one. All right, so extensions. I'm just going to show it because if you haven't seen it, got to find where my button there is. If you haven't seen extensions, I think it's just, we could explain it for 5 minutes, or I could just visually show you what it looks like. So in your Docker GUI, this is a Docker desktop only thing. In your Docker GUI, you have this little extensions list down here now. It starts empty, and it's your job to go into the marketplace. By the way, there's a marketplace now. You can even view it on the web. All this is on Hub, so another artifact type on Hub, I suppose. And there are all these different options here. I think we're, I don't know, what, like close to 60 or something, or 70? I don't even know what you're at now.
I don't know what the current number is.
Yeah, in fact, I didn't update to 4.50. We just got a new release of Docker Desktop today, and I have not installed it. So I'm technically on an older version. But you can see there's all this stuff in here, and it's incredible what you can do in here. Honestly, they asked us captains, I think back when you were still a captain or not a Docker employee, and we were all like, they were asking us for ideas, and we came up with a couple. But I could have not made up this massive list of, adding vCluster, who's been on this show, which allows you to have virtual Kubernetes within inside of Kubernetes. It's actually pretty amazing. Running a OpenShift server inside of Docker Desktop, you can do that. Installing Slim AI or running Lens inside here. I wouldn't even think that you would want to do that, but you can. There's just telepresence. There's all this stuff in here. Developer tools, CI tools, deployment. There's just a ton. Each one of these could deserve their own episode. However, Docker makes a few official ones, and that's what I have some of them here. One of the big recent feature releases is adding the resource usage, which you can kind of tell that Docker's kind of themed theirs with this little blue icon. So I can now see more detailed resource usage of what's going on, and you can see I'm using 17 mega RAM. I have 2 containers running right now because I only have one project. You can see up here I only have one compose file running with 2 apps. So not a lot of resource usage, but you get all these interesting stats. You get charts in here, and it goes on and on and on and on. The one that I'm kind of excited about was something that I had the idea for a few years ago. I wrote a shell script, and then the Docker team actually took it and ran with it and made it so much better as a Docker extension, where you can now back up and restore Docker volumes on your local machine, and you can even clone your local Docker volumes to a remote Docker server, which is also amazing. There's just a lot going on here. So if you haven't checked out extensions, we've had the extension show. You can go back and watch it. We demoed some of them, even like just simple little tools like Trivy, which you could normally run from the command line. But when you run it here, it gives you an image. It gives you, stuff to look at rather than just a command line of text. So there's Sneak's got a tool in here as well. There's lots of other security stuff. I chose the wrong image because there's maybe no vulnerabilities in Alpine. So there's only one. Yeah. So yay, Alpine. You keep us safe. Right. So there's a ton here. Again, I don't know if you have anything to say about it, Michael, but
it's just been fun to watch the ecosystem take and run with the idea. The fact that anybody can build extensions. I made a fun little game which keeps getting brought up in the captains group quite a bit, called Flappy Doc. Just like Flappy Bird, but it's Moby and Molly, and so I mean you can really build anything as an extension, and it's fun to see again what's traditionally been difficult CLI based interactions now have a GUI based interaction, and it opens up a lot of these capabilities to folks that may not be quite as familiar or comfortable in the CLI. And I think in many ways we're still at the start of the capabilities that will come along with this. So I'm excited to see what 2023 is going to bring in this space too. Oh, looks like you're muted.
Yeah, I'm muted. I'm replying to I was actually replying in chat, but I'll just say it. So one of the questions was, who should care about WASM images? My answer there is, at this time, only cutting edge developers.
Yeah.
It's a pretty new thing. It's not new in the browser, but it's a new idea around putting it everywhere on servers and on the back end. So I would say that if you're not the main developer in the team or whatever, like, those people are probably going to know about any new security requirements that the security team is giving them, that they may have to go to something like WASM to do. They might have a mandate to do it, sort of an organizational wide, let's lock things down or improve performance if they've got performance problems, and WASM in maybe a more traditional language, like I was mentioning, Node.js or Ruby or something where the performance isn't as expected, but bundling or building it down into WASM gives you all that performance advancements that you might get with things that in more modern languages that already compile into a binary. So that's at least on my very limited understanding of it. I, as a DevOps person or an ops person, I'm not going to drive that boat. I'm going to wait on the devs to tell me they want to use WASM, and then I'll learn how to support it. I'll learn how to, have our build chains or servers support WASM. But.
Yeah. And I'd agree with that as well too. I mean, it's still pretty early days. I mean, so definitely feel free to play and experiment with it. Am I going to personally go and rewrite all my applications, into WASM? Probably not yet. But I'm probably going to experiment and just poke around with it a little bit. I'll add one other use case that we've seen quite a bit is systems that are wanting to add like plugin architectures to their systems. So for example, Envoy Service Mesh, they're adding the ability to extend the service mesh and to kind of run code within the service mesh. And basically they're running a WASM runtime, and they say, hey, if you want to listen to events or, extend our system, here's the interface to do so. And so then allows developers that want to plug into that, they can write their extensions, these plugins in a variety of different languages, any language that can output the WASM, and then Envoy can ingest that. So that's a very different use case than, hey, I'm going to run my application in straight up WebAssembly.